All right, hey everyone. This is Mr. Miles. I'm going to give you a quick overview, mini lesson, whatever you want to call it, of Ragnarok, or as the Norse would say, Ragnarok, which is not going to be a substitute for you doing your reading, but I want to kind of give you a bit of a mini lesson overview, orient you so that you kind of have an idea of what's happening before you dive into the readings themselves. Okay, so this is me just kind of giving you a little mini lesson over what Ragnarok is, what the gist is of it, and what to expect before you kind of dive into your readings. Okay, so what is Ragnarok? Well, Ragnarok is the Norse apocalypse. It is the Norse end of the world. Okay, Norse mythology is very unique in that most cultures that we study in this class, the Greeks, they don't have an apocalypse myth. The Babylonians, they don't really have an apocalypse myth. The Egyptians don't really have an apocalypse. People don't really have end of the world myths or stories. And those that do are typically fuzzy. Like the Greeks, all that they really write about is that one day the fifth age, the age that we're in, the age of iron, the age of men who are like terrible, is one day going to end because Zeus is going to get fed up with us. But that's really all we know. We don't really know the specifics of it. Norse mythology is very different. Norse mythology is the most detailed apocalypse myth that we probably know. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of talk about what kicks off Ragnarok, and then how does Ragnarok sort of spin out of control. So it all starts with the prettiest god, Balder, okay? Balder the Beautiful. And Balder is killed, okay? Balder has a vision that he is going to die one day, and he tells his mother, Frigg. Frigg loves him. She's like helicopter mom. She doesn't want to do anything that will possibly harm him. So what she does is she wants to make sure that, okay, if he has a dream he's going to die, that means his death is near, and I want to try to prevent it. So she goes to everything in the world, every living thing, to the trees, to the flowers, and she makes them promise, do not hurt my son. And they all do that. Everything. Boars, so no Adonis is going to happen. Snakes, birds, trees, everything promises they are not going to hurt her son. Everything except mistletoe. And if you don't know what mistletoe is like it's a kind of vine sort of plant. And so obviously if you know about the kiss under the mistletoe thing, it's kind of a Christmas tradition. But it can be, the branches can be pruned, kind of like a bush. And so what happens is the gods hear about what Frigg has done by making all the living things in the world promise not to hurt her son. And so they think, oh, this is fun. So they start throwing things at Balder as like a little game to see if they can hurt him. And obviously nothing can hurt him. So, Balder's having fun with it. All the other gods are having fun with it. They're throwing rocks and sticks and everything at him. And he's just like, yeah, I'm fine. Well, Loki, mischief maker that he is, decides, oh, well, I know the one thing that will not bounce off Balder, and that's mistletoe. And he decides to play a trick. So he gives an arrow made of mistletoe and a bow to Balder's twin brother, Hode. And if you remember, Hode is blind. And so he's just like, hey, Hode, he's over there somewhere. Why don't you just go shoot him? And Hode doesn't understand what's happening because he's blind. And so Hode just takes the arrow and the bow and goes, pew, and that mistletoe arrow goes straight into Balder's heart and kills him. Okay. So Loki doesn't technically kill Balder, but Loki does cross the line and winds up hurting and killing his brother. Now, Loki has crossed the line. He's not getting away with it this time. You know how we've talked about how Loki is constantly being dragged in front of the gods and having to beg for his life. Please don't cut off my head. Please don't kill me. Da, 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 da. Because the gods are constantly like having to deal with Loki's messes that he makes. Well, this is where they cross the line. This is where he has gone too far. So Loki could have possibly redeemed himself because after Balder dies, Odin and Frigg are obviously upset. Their most beautiful son, all the universe is dead. So they try to bring him back to life. So they send a messenger down to Hell, the person and the place, and they ask Hell, Balder is special because he's so beautiful. Can we please have him back in the living world? And Hel basically makes an arrangement where she says, you can have Balder back if every living thing in the world weeps for him. So if everything sheds a tear for Balder, then I'll let him come back to the living. Well, there is one thing that does not shed a tear. And depending on the version, in some versions, it's just a giant. In other versions, it's a giant named Loki, who is the one who refuses to cry. And so not only does Loki kill Balder, he prevents him from coming back to life, which is okay. Maybe that first time we could excuse you. You were just having fun. The second time, though, okay, you really have done it. So the gods eventually capture Loki and they basically stick him in a cave where they take one of his sons, not one of his monster sons, just a regular son, and they cut him open, take his guts out, and tie his guts around Loki's arms and legs so that he can't move. And then a giant snake comes over Loki's head and starts dripping venom that's like basically burning acid onto his face. And his wife takes a giant pitcher or bowl and she tries to catch the snake venom before it drops into his face, but eventually that bowl fills up and she has to dump it, and then the snake will keep dripping its venom, and Loki thrashes around, and that's why we have earthquakes. And obviously that's a pretty brutal punishment. And so Loki swears eternal hatred and revenge against the gods for what they've done to him. Now, once Balder dies, you get something called the Fimbulvetter, which is Fimbulwinter. And it is essentially 3 years in a row of winter, just winter, nothing else. No spring, no summer, no fall. It is just winter for 3 years. And obviously, if there's 3 winters, okay, then nothing's going to grow. Things are going to die. Things are going to starve. And the world becomes this barren place. And people start to really suffer. Now, in this context, while the world is freezing over, if you remember, the sun and the moon are constantly revolving around the earth. In Greek mythology, it's just a chariot pulling the sun, right? In Norse mythology, it is a wolf chasing the sun chariot and the moon chariot. And eventually, the sun and the moon will be devoured by the wolves that are chasing them. Okay. And obviously, once the moon and the sun are devoured, then not only is the earth freezing over, but the earth will also be cast in darkness. You can't see anything. You can't even see the stars. Okay. Now, earthquakes. Loki eventually breaks out of his son's intestine chains and causes a massive earthquake, as well as lets Fenrir break free from his chains, which, if you remember, is a ribbon that was made by the Dark Elves, with 6 impossible things, and that Tyr had to sacrifice his hand so that Fenrir could be bound. Fenrir breaks loose, the giant wolf, and so now Loki is free. Now Fenrir is free, and they are both, for various reasons, incredibly angry. And so Loki gets Fenrir. He also gets his other son, Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, which, if you remember, was just kind of thrown into the sea and left to grow as big as possible. And now he encircles the entire world. Well, now Jormungandr is making his way onto land and has poison breath that kills everything it touches. So obviously, the poison breath, if there's anything still living on the earth, now you've got a giant snake, the poison breath just killing everything. Also, he's coming from the sea, so he's causing massive tidal waves and tsunamis, just sweeping things right off the face of the earth. The tsunamis also free a ship called Naglfar. And Naglfar is a fun little ship that's made out of the toenails of dead men. And basically, the spirits of dead men in hell will jump onto the toenail and fingernail ship of Naglfar, and they will sail to battle against the gods with Jormungandr, with Fenrir, and with Loki. And obviously, Hel will be with them. And that's not all. You've also got the dead. You have the big wolf. You got the big snake. You've got, Loki, chief trickster extraordinaire. You've also got the fire giants. And the fire giants, if you couldn't tell, they are giants who are from the fire world of Muspelheim. And they are led by Surtur. And Surtur carries a giant flaming sword where, if you're a person and you haven't died of starvation from the 3 years of winter, if you haven't gone crazy from the eternal darkness, if you haven't died from the poison breath, if you haven't died from all the tidal waves and tsunamis from Jormungandr, he will sweep his flaming sword across the earth and just scorch and destroy everything it touches. So you will probably die now if you are not already dead yet. And so this giant army of fire giants, dead people, everything else, they cross the Bifrost Rainbow Bridge and they make their way to Asgard. Obviously, Heimdall, who sees everything, will see them coming, and he'll toot his Gjallarhorn, and then all the gods will be called to battle, and they will don their armor and their weapons, and they will go to fight on a giant field of battle called the Vigrid, which is a battle plain, and that's where they will all clash in this climactic final battle. Okay. Eventually, what winds up happening is that the gods and the monsters kind of square off individually. So Odin fights Fenrir, Thor fights Jormungandr, Frey fights Surtur, Tyr fights Garm, which is a giant dog wolf, and then Loki fights Heimdall. All right, so Odin, Fenrir, they fight each other. Fenrir eventually devours Odin. Okay, so Fenrir wins, but Vidar, which is Odin's son, one of his sons, who doesn't really feature in any of the major myths, he has a very special shoe. And the shoe has a super thick sole because what Norse people would do is they would like trim off parts of their soles and they would throw it into a basket and they'd say, "This is for Ragnarok." Because all those little leather shavings from their shoes are stuck onto Vidar's shoe, and what he does is he steps on the lower jaw of Fenrir and rips his jaws apart and kills him. And so he takes revenge on his father. Okay, so no one really wins. They both kind of lose. I guess you could say that's one win for the gods, but I mean, again, Odin's dead. That's kind of a big deal. Similar thing happens when Thor fights Jormungandr. Thor kills Jormungandr with his hammer, but Jormungandr bites him and he's poisonous. So they both die. Okay. Frey fights Surtur. So if you remember when Frey married the ice giant, Gerd, Frey gave up his sword, his magical sword that fights for itself. And he could have really used that in this battle with Surtur. And so Surtur, who has a giant flaming sword, and Frey, who has like no magic sword, pretty much just gets whooped. And so Surtur kills him. So Tyr fights Garm, and They both kill each other. So Tyr, the one-handed one, god of war, justice, he fights the hound that guards hell, the giant hound named Garm, and they both kill each other. So again, you're kind of noticing a pattern here, probably at this point. And then Loki and Heimdall kill each other. Okay, so really, if you're keeping score at home, there was really only one-on-one match that didn't wind up with both people dead, and that is the match between Frey and Surtur. And because Surtur is left alive and all the other major gods are dead, can you take a wild guess what's going to wind up happening to Earth, with the fire giant being the one who's left standing? So Surtur goes berserk, like literally goes crazy in like a battle frenzy. And he basically just sets the whole world on fire, you know. And all of the nine worlds catch on fire, burn, and everyone who's still alive is dead now. And the earth sinks into the sea, and that's it. Now, that's not the end, because there is a new beginning. After a new world comes out of the sea, and before being swallowed, by the way, the sun gave birth to a new sun, just so you know. And then these are the gods who survive Ragnarok. Odin's sons, Vidar and Vali, Magni and Modi, who are the sons of Thor, and they're the ones who inherit Mjolnir after Thor is dead. Balder and Hode, for some reason, magically come back to life, and they're also here to live in Valhalla anyway. And then no goddesses are mentioned, but possibly, we don't know for sure, but possibly Frigg and Freya survive, maybe. But really, all we know about are the major gods' sons living. Um, what about us? What about the people? Well, so if you remember, the first people in this generation, the Adam and Eve, come from the trees, Ask from the ash, and Embla from the elm tree. Um, Sort of a similar thing going on here. You've got two people who survive Ragnarok because they take refuge inside of the tree, the bark of the tree Yggdrasil, and their names are Lif and Lifthrasir, and their names literally mean life and eager for life, or eager to be alive. Okay, which is funny. And so they are the ones who managed to survive Ragnarok, and they managed to repopulate the earth. And actually, after everything burns down, it's almost like the optimism is at its height. Like, most people are super excited because it feels like everything will be good now. We have a chance to take the world that was so broken and bad and full of sin and dark and evil, and we can turn it into something good and beautiful. Um, and so that's why, Ragnarok is actually not the worst possible thing, because yes, everybody dies and it's sad and it's tragic, but it's also epic, and it gives us an opportunity to kind of, you know, we're going to do a controlled burn, right? Like some people do on pastures. Like, we're going to burn a section of this pasture so that, yes, we kill all the grass right now that's there, but it'll make the ground more fertile in the long run, and maybe it'll come back stronger and better than it was the previous time. So that's basically the gist of Ragnarok. And so you can kind of see why you might find some comfort in it if you're a Norse person who you're like, yeah, I'm going to die. There's still some comfort to be found in it. So that's essentially Ragnarok. If you got questions, let me know. Shoot me a remind. I'll be happy to explain anything else in more detail.